Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback rankings for Week 10. If you recall, last week we tried a new schedule, and if you're interested in early access to tight ends and defensive rankings, those will be posted later this evening for members only, and then they will be available for the public on Friday. So if you would like early access, join the Blunt rotation down below. Hit the join button, and for $4.20 a month, about $1 per week, you get early access to quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses. But everyone at least gets quarterbacks. Let's get to the video. And we are starting with the unranked players this week. We got Joe Burrow out continuously. Not sure when he's coming back. I'm hopeful it's this season, but I could see him not come back at all. Jaden Daniels is now on IR. That broken arm is a season ender. CJ Stroud has a concussion, so not ranking him, assuming he misses at least one game. Sadly, it's a great matchup for him against Jacksonville. But Carson Wentz is on IR. We do get JJ McCarthy in Minnesota. There's also 4 teams on bye, so Mahomes of the Chiefs, Flacco of the Bengals, Dak Prescott of the Cowboys, and Cam Ward of the Titans. None of them are ranked in this video. So let's move on. Let's talk about the matchups this week. And as always, I show you every single defensive matchup on this graph, organized from most points allowed to fewest. Those are the blue stats all season long, how many points per game allowed by every single team in the league. When it comes to recency bias, though, sometimes it matters a bit more. In the last 4 games, have they been getting worse or better? Those red stats indicate just the last 4 games for every team. So unfortunately, the top 2 matchups, Dallas and Cincinnati, are well above everybody else on this chart. However, they are on bye. The 2 best spots cannot be taken advantage of this week. So no massive upgrade for someone like Brissett against the Cowboys or Caleb Williams last week against the Bengals. Those 2 did prove to be amazing matchups. So this week, the best spot available is Jacksonville, which isn't just a good matchup on the season, ranks top 3 on the year. In the last month, it is the number 1 matchup overall. 26.4 points per game allowed in just their last 4. And it doesn't shock me that Geno Smith just threw 4 touchdowns on them. This Jaguars defense is not legit. I think they've gotten a bit lucky with turnovers, but in terms of actually stopping quarterbacks, they can't really get it done. So especially with no Travis Hunter, there's no cornerback coming to the rescue. Sadly, CJ Stroud, expecting him to miss. I don't think he'll be available with a concussion. I really expect him to miss at least 1 week, if not 2. And this is the big test. Do you have the cojones to trust Davis Mills off the wire for just 1 game? Against Jacksonville at home, it is in division. Weird shit can happen. But if Geno Smith can throw for 4 touchdowns, I think Davis Mills can do the same. Nico Collins should dominate. I think Davis Mills gets a massive upgrade. He is my favorite streaming quarterback this week, but not ranking him in the top 10. I'm not that bold, but I definitely upgrade Davis Mills. Jared Goff, though, a very legit start this week. When Goff goes off, he has an elite ceiling. I think this is one of those weeks I like Jared Goff a lot against the Commanders, a defense that may be giving up after losing Jaden Daniels. They're already reeling and just lost Marshawn Lattimore for the year. There is no real problem when you face off against Washington. Just ask Torrey Horton. Next up, good matchup here for Justin Herbert, but it does rank a little bit lower in the last month. It is number 5 on the season. The Steelers have not had a good defense, but in certain spots, they have really stepped up. They forced some key turnovers. Daniel Jones, thought he had an amazing matchup last week, did throw for a lot of yards against Pittsburgh, but did also have 5 total turnovers, 3 picks, 2 fumbles lost. Daniel Jones had a rough time. So without Joe Alt, not sure if I'm dying to expect this point total from Herbert, but he's been amazing this year. I would still assume Herbert is in the lineup. The matchup still ranks top 13 in the last month. 18.8 points is still a decent floor to expect at QB. Next, good matchup here goes to Caleb Williams. The Giants have also been even easier in the last month, so Caleb definitely gets another upgrade. Last week it worked out for him against the Bengals. And then Josh Allen, we're always starting him, but he gets a good matchup. Miami in the last month has been better, but the game against Kirk Cousins and Dillon Gabriel is still in that 4-week sample size, and the windy game and the backup quarterback with no Drake London really skew these numbers. Otherwise, I don't fear Miami. In general, Allen dominates against the Dolphins. He should do that. Yet again, not going to worry about Josh Allen. But Jaxson Dart gets a good matchup here. We saw Joe Flacco absolutely torch the Bears defense, almost had a amazing comeback. Even without Scattaboo, I would expect Jaxson Dart to have a good fantasy game. Weather might be a factor though, so that's the only thing that's a variable in that matchup. Otherwise, both the Giants and Bears defense should give up a lot of points to both quarterbacks. Dillon Gabriel, this is a big test. Do you really trust a Browns quarterback? But the Jets defense is probably even easier after the fire sale they just had with no Sauce Gardner or Quinn Williams. So the matchup should get even better against the Jets, but Dillon Gabriel, are you really going to trust the rookie Browns quarterback? Good luck if you're going to do that. Detroit is a good spot, especially in the last month, up above 20 points per game allowed. So Mariota does have a shot here to offer some value. Typically, he does play well in fantasy, especially with some rushing value. Another good matchup here goes to Matthew Stafford. The Niners have gotten even easier on the year. It is at 17.7, but in the last month, up above 20 points as well. So I like Stafford. I think with some revenge after that earlier season loss, I do think the Rams offense will step up. Next best matchup goes to Bryce Young, but the Saints have been getting more difficult. In the last month, it's down to 15 points, and that's definitely not exciting for Bryce Young, a player that's really hard to trust in the first place. Not dying to endorse Bryce Young this week. But next good matchup goes to the Titans, who are on bye, so sadly that one's wiped off the table. And then Jordan Love gets a relatively above average matchup, but we are much closer to the neutral zone. The Eagles could look way better off the bye. They have some games where Jalen Carter was missing that kind of bump up the stats. I don't know if I fully trust Jordan Love after losing Tucker Kraft. That receiving core, a little suspect. So the weather's a factor. It's going to be really cold. It's not raining or snowing in Lambeau this week, but below 40 degrees, things could get weird. Sometimes there's like really low scoring games in those cold games in Green Bay. But next average matchup goes to J.J. McCarthy. The Ravens are getting much better, though. In the last month, it's down to 14 points. But on the season, it's still one of these average neutral matchups. I don't know if I trust J.J. McCarthy enough. He's getting the job done. He has 2 division road wins, but in those games, only under 200 yards in both. If it wasn't for the rushing stats, I don't think J.J. McCarthy would be appealing at all. So this Ravens matchup, a bit more difficult. I think I'm going to be fading McCarthy. I'd like to see him prove it in a second game in a row. But Bo Nix gets a decent matchup. I definitely don't fear the Raiders. The only way Bo Nix does not play well is if he hands it off too much in the red zone. If RJ Harvey and Dobbins vulture him, then maybe he sucks. But against the Raiders in division, usually teams dominate them, and I would expect the Broncos to do the same. We also get a decent matchup here for Lamar Jackson, especially in the last month. The Vikings would rank as a top 5 matchup, up to 21.2 points allowed in the last 4 games. So definitely starting Lamar regardless of matchup, but I would upgrade him significantly against the Vikings, not afraid of this matchup. Drake Maye gets a tough spot here. The Bucks are below league average on the season, and then especially in the last month, they're down to bottom 5, only giving up 13.5 points. So the Bucks are actually a tough spot for Drake Maye coming off the bye with their offensive injuries. I assume Todd Bowles wants to clamp down on defense, focus a little bit more, and I could see their defense be even tougher off the bye week. So this will be a tough test for Drake Maye on the road. In the last month, odds are he scores less than 15 fantasy points in this game. In the next spot, though, we do have Michael Penix Jr. The Colts are getting a bit easier, but it's all going to come down to whether or not Bijan Robinson offers the yak for Michael Penix. I expect Drake London to play well. I think Kyle Pitts could do a good job here, but if Bijan doesn't offer you like 100 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, then that upside for Penix kind of goes out the window. He just doesn't offer enough volume in general to be a safe start. But the matchup's not terrible against Indianapolis. Seattle is a tough spot, has been a little easier lately, but still on the year. Jacoby Brissett should be downgraded here. Going to be an interesting division rivalry game with the Cardinals offense looking much better under Brissett. The Chiefs are on bye, so a tough matchup is thankfully off the board. And then the Patriots have gotten much more difficult in the last month, down to 13.9 points. So similar to Drake Maye in this matchup, neither defense is going to give up an inch, and I could see Baker Mayfield get into a tough back and forth game with Drake Maye. There might be a lot of field goals settled on in this game, but both Baker Mayfield and Drake Maye are really good. I would still probably consider them top 10 options. Justin Fields gets a tough matchup against Cleveland, so not really expecting much from him. The rushing stats can always save you, but the risk with Fields is always under 10 points. Sam Darnold gets a tough spot against Arizona, who really shut down Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. I do think the Walter Nolan first-round pick edition, finally coming back after the bye for Arizona, does make that defense even scarier. They do have some good personnel on the defensive side of the ball. So Darnold not going to have as good of a game as last week against Washington, but maybe Rashid Shaheed comes to the rescue. Tyler Shough gets a tough matchup against Carolina, so not dying to upgrade him. He's still needing to prove it. Not going to pick him up off the wire, that's for sure. In Green Bay, it's been a tough spot for quarterbacks, so Jalen Hurts might have diminished returns, but in general, the rushing stats always cover you with Jalen Hurts. The next matchup, though, for Aaron Rodgers has gotten way more difficult, down to bottom 3. In the last month, the Chargers are allowing barely over 10 points per game in fantasy. So I would expect a lot of field goals in this matchup. I see a lot of defense. And in prime time in the Dome, I think it'll be a battle between Cameron Dicker and Chris Boswell, a bit more than Rodgers versus Herbert. So I don't want to trust Rodgers too much, but it could be okay. Without touchdowns, though, you never get enough yardage from Rodgers to really move the needle. If he doesn't throw for 3+ touchdowns, you do get screwed. And even with that, the upside isn't like as elite as some other players. So Rodgers, not the best start in primetime this week. He didn't really offer that much value last time he played on Sunday night. And then these last 5 to mention are all very difficult, but the Rams, not a good spot for Brock Purdy and Mac Jones. However, the Shanahan offense usually steps up in this division rivalry. Could be a high-scoring game. So not going to totally fade Purdy or Mac Jones. Whoever's the starter, I think will still offer a decent floor. And then if you read into the matchup stats, the Falcons defense is a tough spot here for Daniel Jones. So with 5 turnovers last week, I don't know if I'm dying to trust him as much. The yardage is probably not going to be there. I expect a lot of handoffs. It's going to be more of a Jonathan Taylor versus Bijan game rather than Daniel Jones versus Penix. So good luck there, but he still offers a lot of upside in that Colts offense. You might not care about the matchup. And then the Bills have been really difficult lately. It is the toughest matchup over the last month, down to 9.1 points against Buffalo. And in division, it's usually their kryptonite. The Dolphins offense probably going to struggle against the Bills. But these last 2 are pretty tough. Denver, always a nightmare spot. So Geno Smith, probably the worst quarterback this week, not going to upgrade him at all. And then on the year, the Texans have been a nightmare, an average of 10.5 points basically per game all season. So Trevor Lawrence definitely not getting an upgrade in division with an injury to Travis Hunter. In division against the Texans, I don't think Jacoby Myers is going to be the savior. So not starting Trevor Lawrence. Those are definitely the guys I'm downgrading. So that is it for matchup stats. Now let's run through my rankings. And at 1 and 2, we're not going to get cute. We're going to stick with those elite quarterbacks we drafted higher than anyone else. They are healthy. They have relatively good matchups. And we are 100% trusting both Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. But my preference this week is Allen at number 1. Typically, those Bills-Dolphins games, the Bills are always scoring at least 30, if not 40+ points. So 100% starting Josh Allen. I would expect a little more rushing stats. With Lamar coming off the hamstring, he didn't run it as much as we would have expected against the Dolphins last time we saw them. So Lamar at the Vikings gets a slightly more difficult matchup. I'm definitely not fading either. However, my preference is Josh Allen. Those Bills-Dolphins games usually benefit Allen quite a bit. But these next 2 are locked in the lineup. I'm definitely endorsing Bo Nix. On Thursday night against the Raiders, the only risk here is if RJ Harvey and J.K. Dobbins do not share those goal line reps. But I would assume Bo Nix has a really good game. I feel like they're kind of due for an offensive explosion. And this reminds me of that Bengals matchup on Monday night several weeks ago, where they're just going to be able to do whatever they want. Even if they stall out on a random drive, their defense will give them the ball back right away. And if you told me they dropped 25, 30 points by halftime would not shock me at all. The Raiders are not going to put up any real fight against Bo Nix and the Broncos. So they will dominate them. Bo Nix should have a great game. There is no chance in hell I am not starting Bo Nix. He's had some elite upside. And even against Houston last week, he put up some good stats. I was a bit shocked how surprisingly well he played against the Texans. So I'm trusting Bo Nix. Done disrespecting him. Definitely an endorsement at number 3. But Jalen Hurts gets a tough matchup here, and the weather could be a problem. Sometimes in those really cold games, teams kind of just clamp up and the offense just kind of stalls out. There is a chance that they settle for some field goals and it might be a lower scoring game, especially in one of the first like really cold games of the year. Sometimes you're just not ready for it. So the frozen tundra in Lambeau, not going to be as cold as possible. It's still 38 degrees there, but definitely on the lower side. And who knows, that could be a problem. Maybe people clench up and the offense kind of stalls out. But I would still start Jalen Hurts. Even in those scenarios, he's going to offer you enough rushing stats to always be viable. 20 plus points is always expected from Jalen Hurts. So not a big shocker in the top 4. We have no Mahomes. We have no Dak Prescott. We have no Flacco this week. And especially Mahomes would have ranked top 5, if not for the bye. So those 4 are no-brainers. Starting at 5, though, I think we are chasing upside. And this is the week where I think Goff is going to have one of those insanely productive games. This game means something to Detroit. The loss to the Vikings was kind of embarrassing off the bye against McCarthy. We did not see that coming at all. Very few people had any faith in Minnesota, and their offense really looked bad. So Goff at home is usually the better play. However, last week it didn't work out. The yardage was okay, but the touchdowns did not really click. And then he also had a turnover. So I think this matchup against Washington is a perfect get-right game. Not only off the Vikings game, they do remember how their season ended. Last year they were the 1 seed. They came off the bye and got shocked by Jaden Daniels and the Commanders' defense. So I think this is a really important game for Dan Campbell and the organization. I think there's a lot of motivation here to play well. And the Commanders just let Sam Darnold put on a clinic. Their defense is not impressive at all, has way too many aging veterans, and especially with Lattimore going down, I just don't see any red flag here. I think it's going to be pitch and catch. Amon-Ra is going to dominate, and I would assume Laporta picks up right where he left off last week. Laporta looked amazing, and J-Mo probably has a deep touchdown. So if Tesla gets involved, that's going to be amazing. But the only real deciding factor between a 20-point game from Goff this week and a truly elite performance is if Gibbs catches a touchdown. If Gibbs offers you a bunch of yak in the passing game, then you're going to dominate with Goff. So I think it's one of those weeks. I think he has that 30-point ceiling this week. I really think it is possible, and I do not want to fade him. Other than Davis Mills, Goff gets the best matchup on paper this week. The biggest upgrade goes to the Lions quarterback, and for those reasons, I see a blowout. I think Goff's offense will dominate. So I'm hopeful that Montgomery doesn't fuck me over, but I do expect at least 3 touchdown passes from Goff this week. I think this is the week to bump up Goff in the top 5. We know when it goes well, the ceiling is elite. This week, start Goff with confidence. But at 6 and 7, I love this matchup between the Bears and Giants. On paper, neither defense is going to show up. Every stat indicates that every position gets a big upgrade in this spot. The only big problem is the weather. The temperature is going to be closer to freezing. It's under 40 degrees, and then there is some wind and a chance of rain that could turn into snow if the temperature drops low enough. So that is a problem. Weather might be impacting both offenses, but aside from that, I can't think of a single reason why there would be a lot of defense. The Giants just let the Niners go up and down the field, do whatever they wanted. And then the Bears just let Joe Flacco throw for 470 yards and drop well over 40 points. So I just don't see any turnovers from either of them. Neither defense scares me at all. And it's just a question of which guy will run the ball more and offer that rushing touchdown. Otherwise, the floor is elite with both. I just see a ton of points. I don't want to be fading either guy, especially after last week's game from Caleb. He had a bagel for Rome and still dropped 40 points in fantasy. Caleb was amazing, and this game should be a shootout as well. So love Caleb, love Jaxson Dart with no Cam Scatterbo. The rushing stats are going to be there, and I would expect a lot of garbage time as well. I think the Bears are going to own the Giants early and drop a lot of points, and then the Giants will have a lot of garbage time to catch up. Both teams should drop more than 30 points. So I think both guys will have a high ceiling and very high floor as well. Very safe plays, definitely top 10 in week 10. At 8, 9, 10, and 11, I think we're dropping down a tier. I think they're a little bit less safe, but there's still a lot of value with these quarterbacks, and in general, you always want them in your lineup. I would still start them if I had them. I'm not going to pick up Davis Mills just to be benching one of these guys, but Matthew Stafford at number 8 should have a good game. The Niners defense has been very vulnerable lately, allowing over 20 points per game in the last month. And Stafford's an MVP candidate. You always expect a touchdown for Adams. There's usually another one for Puka. And odds are Kyren Williams will get in on the scoring pretty heavily. So unless Kyren has like 3 rushing touchdowns, he does dominate the Niners. So that is possible, but I wouldn't expect it. I would expect one of those touchdowns to be a reception as well. And in general, Stafford is offering you 3 touchdown passes every week. So Niners defense does not scare me. The Rams are kind of in a must win. They lost that first one to the Niners earlier in the year on Thursday night. And in this matchup on the road, I would expect their offense to step up. They had a bye week recently, and there's really no fear at all here. I can't envision a reason to be fading Matthew Stafford. So start him for sure. No doubt about it. I want Stafford in the lineup, but because he doesn't run the ball, I'd rather go with Caleb or Jaxson Dart. And then I do see a little more upside for Goff against the Commanders, but Stafford should still be very good. I would still expect 20 plus points from Matthew Stafford. Justin Herbert has been on an MVP tear, at least in fantasy. He's been amazing. And although there's been a few more interceptions than I'd like to see, he usually does that early on and then comes back and just dominates in terms of yardage. It really pads the numbers and it covers you. So I like Justin Herbert. He also runs the ball quite a bit. And on the year, the Steelers are a top 5 matchup. So there's no reason to be downgrading him. It has gotten a bit more difficult lately, down to number 13 in just the last month. So the matchup's not as good. And then last week against Daniel Jones, definitely raised a red flag. Jones had 5 total turnovers, 3 picks, 2 fumbles. And with no Joe Alt, I could see a lot of sacks and very little time in the pocket. The pressure rate on Herbert this week is going to be pretty high. So I actually see this game as a bit more of a Cameron Dicker, Chris Boswell kicking tournament rather than a touchdown fight between Herbert and Rodgers. But in general, Herbert really pads the stats. And even if he does turn it over multiple times, I think his rushing stats will cover all your bases. So Herbert's been a bit bust proof lately. And in general, he offers you a very high floor, high ceiling as well. I don't see a reason to fully fade him, but the Steelers have shown you at times they can show up on defense, and the turnovers can really cap your upside. So hopefully that doesn't happen. In general, Herbert doesn't throw that many interceptions, but in the last few weeks, they have been kind of consistent. There's been a lot more turnovers this year compared to last. So Herbert, I think, has capped upside against Pittsburgh, but the floor is always safe. I would still expect a minimum of 18, 19, 20 points from Justin Herbert, but not expecting that elite ceiling. Some of these other guys, I think, could go over 30 pretty easily. So Herbert at number 9, you could do better, but I'm still going to start him in the top 10. And then Baker Mayfield and Drake Maye at 10 and 11 going against each other have tough matchups, especially in the last month. The Patriots and Bucks are down to bottom 5 matchups against the position. But where I'm going to dismiss that is just the talent of these two guys. Both are in the MVP conversation, and if you're watching the Bucks offense or the Patriots offense for that matter, you know that they are somewhat matchup proof. So I could see a major shootout in this game, but I could also see both defenses step up. There's weird weather in this game where the temperature is over 80 degrees, the humidity is over 70%, and the chance of rain is looking like 30+%. So the weather could be a major factor in this one, and I could see weird shit happen in Tampa. There's usually some strange things going on. However, it's just the matchups that scare me, why I'm not putting them at the top. If you told me this game was a shootout like that Bucks-Seahawks game, I also wouldn't be shocked. There is truly elite upside as well. But Baker missing some receivers, same with Drake Maye, now that Booty is expected to miss. I do lower the upside a little bit. And I've just seen a little more consistency from someone like Herbert. Last week in a tough matchup, we did see Drake Maye kind of shit the bed. Drake Maye was nowhere near as effective as I would have thought against the Falcons. So Drake Maye at number 11. I have a tough decision this week. On both my fantasy teams, I have both Herbert and Maye. And I believe I'm starting Herbert in one and Maye in the other just because I think both have very high value. But if I had to start just one, I'd rather go Herbert, and then I'd also rather go Baker Mayfield above Drake Maye. I think the Bucs matchup is going to be the toughest between the two. Baker should be fine, but if Christian Gonzalez wakes up, maybe he limits Igbuka. London, though, had a field day against the Pats last week. So both, I think, are fine based on name value and production this year. It's not a proposition where I'd like to be benching them, but I just see kind of capped upside. I'd rather go with Caleb Williams or Jaxson Dart. I definitely prefer the matchup for Jared Goff. So in the top 11, I'm still telling you to start them, but just a little diminished return this week. Slightly capped upside in a tough back and forth game between Baker and Drake Maye. At 12, I think we're dropping down a tier, and now we're firmly in the streaming conversation. And if you're in a deeper format or you need to replace Mahomes or Dak Prescott this week, then maybe you will not get picky. Maybe you will just settle for the highest ranked that I have to offer. But at number 12, I am kind of worried about this Jordan Love offense. It's just not consistent enough to know what you're going to get. The yardage was there last week, but no touchdown passes. In general, Josh Jacobs is usually the go-to option in the red zone. So with no Tucker Kraft, I just do not trust a singular playmaker that's catching the ball in Green Bay. It's just not available to have that elite upside anymore in the Packers system. So I fear that Love is just not going to offer you that elite upside. I worry about the touchdown passes, and I genuinely think this game is going to be a lot of field goals settled on for both teams. I think it's a little more defensive than offensive. But against the Eagles, I could definitely be wrong. It could easily be a shootout. There's always that potential to factor in, and the yards have been there for Love. So the floor is generally safe. He's not throwing a lot of interceptions either. So it's just this Eagles matchup that has it tricky to predict. Sometimes the Eagles really step up, and then they also made some key additions on defense in trades recently. So I don't think Love is the safest bet. He still needs to prove that he can do it week in, week out. But in terms of highest upside remaining, I don't see a higher ceiling for any other player in the rest of the ranks. There's just not that level upside where you could get 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. If you told me that's what it turned out to be this week for the Packers and Love just goes off and he finishes top 3 at the position, would not shock me at all. So I still have him at 12, but I don't feel great about it. With no Tucker Kraft, I don't think that the chances of that being a lock are very safe. But it's still in the realm of possibility, and I do still think Love is one of the better quarterbacks left to be ranked. So at number 12 against the Eagles in a potential shootout, I'll still consider him a decent start, but only in the streaming conversation. At number 12, you could do better. I'd still rather go with Drake Maye or Baker Mayfield in tougher matchups. But at 13, I'm going to trust the matchup stats, and this is where I rank Davis Mills. If it was CJ Stroud, I might have Stroud in the top 10. I genuinely think that this Jaguars matchup is that good. They gave up 5 touchdown passes to Matthew Stafford. They gave up 4 to Geno Smith, and although one of them was in overtime, I don't care. If you can't stop Geno Smith, you fucking suck on defense. So Davis Mills in a bit of a must win. The Texans are definitely in desperation mode after losing a lot of early season games. I think will play well. He just funneled the ball to Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz once he took over, and the matchup is great for both of those guys. I think Davis Mills will play phenomenally. I trust the Texans to win this game, but maybe it's a heavy defensive battle and the Jags defense wakes up just because it's in division, but with no weather to worry about, it's in the Texans' dome home stadium. I think Mills will dominate. I love this matchup. In the last month, it's not just been top 3, but it's been the best overall. Average stat line leads to 26 fantasy points against Jacksonville. They are just so vulnerable. And if you're in any other type of format, whether it's 6-point passing touchdowns or a little boost for yards, I think Davis Mills is a very safe start. I just do not fear the Jaguars secondary whatsoever. So I love Davis Mills. I understand if you want to just leave him on the waiver wire, though. Odds are he's only valuable for 1 week because I do expect Stroud back from his concussion in week 11. So if that is irrelevant to you, if you do not have the space, don't push it. There's still some good options in this tier, and if you are going to settle for one of them, be my guest. It makes plenty of sense, but if you are desperate, if you lost Joe Flacco, if you are streaming the position, and you are riding on the seat of your pants, I would go Davis Mills with confidence. Just love this matchup so much. I didn't endorse Geno Smith high enough last week, and this matchup, I think, has proven itself to be a good one. So trust Davis Mills. Sounds disgusting. I still trust Davis Mills against the Jaguars. The matchup is so good. But Brock Purdy coming off the toe injury, I assume will get the start this week. If they were ever saving him for one particular game, I would assume it would be this one, because I think there is an advantage of making the pivot to Purdy and surprising the Rams just a little bit. But in general, it's just the Shanahan system, why I'm going to trust him. It's just a question of will he start or will he not? The Rams matchup is not good. It's definitely not an easy one. They have ranked bottom 5 on the year. So on paper, it's a downgrade, but in this division rivalry, I don't expect the Niners to just roll over. They shocked us last time they played the Rams, and Mac Jones looked really good, did whatever he wanted down the field. He was throwing it at a very high rate without some of their top pass catchers. He did all of that with guys like Tonjes and Kendrick Bourne as his go-to options. So with Kittle healthy, with a chance that Ricky Pearsall returns, and Juwan Jennings firmly back in the lineup, I like the upside, I like the floor. I trust that the Niners quarterback will be a safe play this week. A minimum of 16 points guaranteed, and I think odds are you'll go over 18. Somewhere around 19 points is my projection for the quarterback in San Francisco this week. But the Rams have only given up about 14.5 per game this season. On paper, that is an optimistic projection, but I think there's an extra touchdown available for the Niners quarterback. So at number 14, I would still rather go Davis Mills. Davis Mills isn't coming off an injury like Purdy is, but I still think the value is there. And in the same tier, if you don't want to make the space and add Davis Mills, just stick with Brock Purdy if you've been waiting for him to come back. But if he's not going to play, I'd probably put Mac Jones right here as well. I don't see that much difference in fantasy value between the two Niners quarterbacks. It's either Purdy or Mac Jones, and the offense is kind of the same, regardless of who's the guy. It's still Shanahan calling the same plays. But at 15, I have Daniel Jones versus the Falcons, and the matchup against Atlanta is a tough one. On the year, the Falcons allow bottom 4 numbers in fantasy to quarterbacks, and Daniel Jones kind of shit the bed, had 5 total turnovers last week against the Steelers, but I don't think this matchup is as scary as Pittsburgh. Daniel Jones probably has a bounce back coming pretty soon, and he has really good receiving weapons. I still trust Pittman, Downs, and Alec Pierce quite a bit. The matchup's not good for Tyler Warren, so that is one diminished factor here. In general, the Falcons defense is one that is troublesome. Like last week, Drake Maye didn't have many points against the Falcons himself. So I could see some diminished returns on Daniel Jones. I'm not expecting a top 10 game from him. Again, I would rather go Davis Mills here, but if you don't want to make that decision and pick up someone off the wire just to drop them next week, then just stick with Daniel Jones. In the same tier, it should be fine. I don't think there's anywhere near as much upside though, and I could see him handed off to Jonathan Taylor way too much and really cap your upside. I expect a big back and forth game between the running backs in Germany. It's going to be a Taylor versus Bijan game rather than a Jones versus Penix game. I don't expect multiple passing touchdowns to come easily for Daniel Jones. So the upside I think is capped, but there's always some rushing value as well. Jones can still scramble and give you like 40 yards and a rushing touchdown. Floor is still pretty high, but to expect a elite game against the bad matchup Falcons while Taylor probably dominates, that I think is asking too much. I think Davis Mills is a higher upside play against Jacksonville than Daniel Jones versus the Falcons. Sam Darnold is the last player in this tier, and Darnold has been playing amazing football. He looks really good, and the addition of Rashid Shaheed definitely benefits him. So while Cooper Kupp exits the lineup, probably not coming back for a while with a hamstring injury, I do think the addition of Shaheed was a wise NFL move, but as someone who's heavily invested in Torrey Horton, I was kind of sad to see it. But good for Darnold. That's kind of all that matters here. And I do still trust the floor. But the matchup against the Cardinals is not a good one. If you started Dak Prescott last week, you definitely regretted that. And Arizona is a tougher matchup, especially with Walter Nolan added to the defense. Their first round pick is a legit defensive tackle. I'm not dying to endorse Darnold this week. Last week he was my favorite play. Against the Commanders is a much different story, though. This matchup is much more difficult against the Cardinals. And for that reason, I don't think he's like a lock in the lineup this week. At QB 16, I could see it be a very low-scoring game. A lot of field goals settled on. And for whatever reason, the Seahawks are still a bit cursed, have been losing a lot of games at home over the last couple years. So anything could happen in a division game. However, in general, I trust the floor with Darnold at this point. He has offered a very safe 17-point floor in most weeks. So that's my projection, about 17.5 for Darnold. I think he's fine, but probably not going to go over 20 against Arizona, which has been a bottom 10 matchup this season. Moving forward, though, only in a super flex league would I consider it. We are beyond the streaming territory, and in one quarterback leagues, I would be benching all these players. But maybe you're in a tough spot. Maybe your waiver wire is depleted, and with no Mahomes or Dak Prescott this week, you might just be desperate enough to be looking to the waiver wire. Maybe you were filling things in with Flacco, and this week you got to pivot. So let's offer up some other lower end names. The upside is pretty limited, but there are still some guys that can offer very, very good production. Sometimes you dismiss those low end options and they surprise you. So let's look to the same matchup as that Darnold game. I have Jacoby Brissett keeping it interesting against the Seahawks. The matchup is not good. Seattle has a very legit defense, but lately it's been easier to throw on them than earlier in the year. But their secondary is healthy off the bye, and last week they gave Daniels a rough time. I don't think it's a big upgrade, but Brissett's offense has looked really legit since he's taken over. So I don't think it's the worst start you could make, but not my favorite. At QB 17, it's just trusting the production. He does scramble a little bit, and then McBride has been scoring touchdowns consistently. Harrison also looks good. So this offense is not terrible, and I think they'll keep it interesting. Against Seattle, there is some risk, but I think the floor is actually pretty safe. I still think Brissett will give you at least 16 points against Seattle. Maybe only one interception, but in general, multiple touchdown passes should cover you for a decent floor. I would expect about 240, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. That should be okay. Not amazing, but fine. At 18, I have Marcus Mariota versus Detroit, and honestly, I might be underestimating his upside. The Lions matchup is top 10 on the season. However, I see this as a very important game for their defense, and I think they want some revenge after the playoff loss last year. So with no Jaden Daniels, the offense isn't going to be as good, and the Lions, I think, are hungry. Aiden Hutchinson, I think, is going to cause a lot of problems, really disrupt the pocket, and I am expecting at least 1 or 2 turnovers from Mariota. I think it could get ugly, and at times, the Lions totally blow you out. If the final score is 40-10, it would not shock me. I don't see a lot of upside here for Mariota. Unless Terry McLaurin suits up, I don't expect multiple touchdowns from Mariota. It's really just the rushing stats that cover the bases. Otherwise, I think the upside is very low in this matchup. I think the Commanders' offense is going to have a rough time. They won't be able to run the ball. The Lions are a tough matchup there, and if they get desperate, then the interceptions will rack up. I just don't trust Mariota enough. But on paper, the matchup is not scary. The Lions have allowed over 20 points per game in the last 4 games. Maybe I'm discounting Mariota a little too much, but my gut is telling me the Lions defense really steps up here. For that reason, I think I would rather pass on Marcus. Looking to the waiver wire, give me Davis Mills over Mariota. I'd rather pick up Mills in week 10 and start him than Mariota. But rest of season, Mariota does have more value, so maybe you care a bit more about streaming the position long-term than in just 1 week. I understand, but it feels really disappointing to go Mariota in this matchup. Justin Fields also feels like a trap in this game. The rushing stats are always valuable. However, the Browns should have a good defense, especially off the bye. I trust their coaching. And it's not a guarantee that Garrett Wilson returns to the offense. So if he does not, then I would lower Fields quite a bit, but odds are the floor is decent. Usually Fields can still get you about 15, 16 points because of the rushing stats, covering a lot of lost points with turnovers. But there are some terrible floor games from Fields. The safety with him just is non-existent. So if you're not getting one of those amazing high ceiling games, then usually you get nothing. And oftentimes it all happens in the fourth quarter. The first half is a nightmare. You really regret starting Fields. And then it all kind of avalanches back to you in the second half. And you're like, okay, at least in garbage time, he covered my ass. But this is one of those games where I could see the Browns defense just really shut him down all game long. I could see less than 10 points on the scoreboard from the Jets offense. After the fire sale, there's no chance they feel like they have a shot to win. There could be some low morale in the Jets building. All the players that are still remaining probably wish it was them that got traded. So Justin Fields feels like a risky option this week. The Browns defense is not a good one. And in general, I just don't trust his floor. This feels like a landmine, very low end game from Justin Fields. I'd rather pass if I could, but because he runs the ball so much, he's still in the top 20. And Superflex, I would assume he still gives you at least like 14, 15 points. But that's not enough in a regular one quarterback league. I would pass. At 20, Michael Penix Jr. is interesting, but it's all going to be reliant on whether or not Bijan Robinson offers you the yak. If Bijan doesn't give you like 80 plus receiving yards this week, then I just don't see it working out with Michael Penix, because Sauce Gardner's incoming, so maybe that's going to be a problem for Drake London. He might not be as unguardable this week. And then Kyle Pitts looks like the next best pass catcher. Mooney feels a bit irrelevant right now. So that's just not enough to get the job done. Penix is really reliant on Bijan covering the numbers. And if Bijan just runs it like crazy this week, then you won't get that extra value in the passing game. So no thanks with Penix. The floor also, I think, is non-existent. The upside is decent. I could see a big shootout against the Colts, but in Germany, it might be more of a run-first approach. And I think Bijan could be more of a liability than a boost in value. So no thanks. If I can avoid it, I'd rather pass on Penix. I think it's more of a Bijan run game. And then JJ McCarthy had a solid fantasy outing, but I still don't trust him. If he doesn't give you the rushing touchdown, then you are kind of screwed. The passing volume just isn't high enough, and I would expect at least one turnover against the Ravens. On the season, Baltimore is a top 15 matchup, but if you only look at the last month, they're down to bottom 6. They would rank 27th, only giving up about 14 points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So not a good matchup at all. In the last month, McCarthy gets a tough spot here, and the Ravens have really stepped up in desperation mode. I do not trust this matchup at all. So no thank you with McCarthy. I need him to prove it again. I am not a McCarthy believer. He has great weapons, but it just doesn't go far enough. If he doesn't throw for 200 plus yards, that's not going to be good enough without a rushing touchdown. So no thanks there. The floor is kind of non-existent with McCarthy, and the ceiling is still kind of capped. But these last 7 names, I have no desire to start. This next tier, I don't think is worth your time. Rodgers against the Chargers. It's a tough matchup this season, bottom 6. And I also envision this being a very heavy field goal game. I think it's going to be a lot of Chris Boswell and Cameron Dicker. So Rodgers never throws for more than 250 yards, and without more than 3 touchdowns, I think the upside is not going to be there. The Chargers probably get at least 1 turnover from Rodgers as well. So not expecting a lot of touchdowns, but it is possible the home field advantage will probably be in favor of the Steelers at SoFi, so maybe that helps him, but the Chargers matchup is tough, and I just see too many field goals to see the upside. Dillon Gabriel scares the shit out of me, so no upside. I don't think it's worth it. The Jets matchup is top 12, but to actually start Dillon Gabriel, that feels too disgusting. I'm willing to endorse Davis Mills, but not Dillon Gabriel. That is a little too high of a price to pay. Trevor Lawrence, though, gets the toughest matchup on the season, so there is some value for him, but if he's not rushing in those touchdowns, then the upside's a bit capped. This is not the matchup I want to trust. I will fade Trevor Lawrence. Not going to start him if I don't have to. But then these last four are gross as fuck. No thank you with Tua versus the Bills. I would expect some turnovers, and the Bills probably shut him down, so no thanks at all. Bryce Young versus New Orleans. The matchup's not bad, but even in good matchups, Bryce is still offered like 12, 13 points. This is a Rico Dowdle game, not a Bryce Young high upside game. Then these last two in the most disgusting tier of them all. Tyler Shough at Carolina. Really tough matchup for him. Bottom 8 on the year, and even more difficult in the last month. Shough has not earned my trust at all. And with no Rashid Shaheed, the value gets even lower. No deep shots to be expected. I could see Taysom Hill also vulture him on the goal line. So no thanks with Shough. I'm never going to trust him until they get some more pieces there. And then lastly, Geno Smith at Denver. Fuck that shit. There's at least 3 turnovers from Geno this week, and maybe not more than 1 touchdown. I just don't see it with Geno. So those quarterbacks are at the bottom of the barrel. These are all my top 28 in week 10. So it's all going to come down to how confident you are outside the top 12. Are you just going to stick with the guy you have, or are you desperate enough to go to the waiver wire and actually stream Davis Mills? But the matchup, I think, is worth it if you do not have a top 12 quarterback and you just need someone for this week and you can afford to drop them right after. Go with Davis Mills. He's my guy at QB 13, my best streaming option I have to offer. But the top 12 are much safer. Definitely in the top 4. Locks in the lineup with Allen and Lamar. Those are no-brainers. Bo Nix should play lights out as long as Harvey and Dobbins don't vulture him. I would expect 25-plus points from Bo Nix. Hurts always has a 20-plus point floor, and against the Green Bay Packers, it could be a shootout, so got to start him. And then Goff, I think, has that elite ceiling this week. Always a bit of risk with him, but I think this is the game where he has 4 touchdowns and offers that 30-point ceiling against Washington. It's a very good matchup. Caleb and Jaxson Dart going to be in a shootout unless the weather has a different idea. And then Stafford, Herbert have been very safe top 10 plays. The matchup for Stafford is good. Herbert might have some turnovers, though. That's why he's lower in the top 10 this week. And then Baker and Drake Maye probably get into a shootout, have elite upside, but their matchups indicate in the last month, the Patriots and Buccaneers are only allowing bottom 5 numbers. There could be some risk with Baker and Drake Maye, but Jordan Love has still not proven I fully trust him. With no Tucker Kraft, there's a little bit of risk, but still a lot of upside. Davis Mills gets the biggest upgrade. He's my favorite acquisition off the wire. I would start him. But then Brock Purdy, if you've been waiting and he gets the start, why not just start him? The floor is going to be high for any Shanahan quarterback, regardless if it's Purdy or Mac Jones. And then Daniel Jones in a tough spot still has decent floor value every week. I still think he's a decent streaming option. And then Darnold gets a downgrade against the Cardinals, but has looked good enough where I would still probably expect at least 17.5 plus points from him. Then Brissett through McCarthy, I'd rather pass, but in Superflex, why not? You'll still probably get about 15, 16 points. Brissett has looked good, but I could see Seattle totally shut him down. Mariota with some rushing stats. Otherwise, I'm afraid the Lions really play well on defense. And then when Fields has a bad game, it's terrible. So against Cleveland, maybe it's the wrong call, but Penix needs Bijan to step up. Without his yak stats, it'll be gross. And then McCarthy, I still do not trust. The Ravens have been a tough matchup as of late, but beyond the top 21, I would definitely bench them. Rodgers, Gabriel, Lawrence, Tua, Bryce Young, Tyler Shough, and Geno Smith are not safe plays whatsoever. So that's it for this video. That's it at quarterback. If you're interested in early access to tight end and defense, I will be posting that later on tonight, and it will be available on Friday for everyone else. But join the blunt rotation if you want early access. If not, I'll see you next time. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.